My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 34 years old. The morning my mother-in-law carried my clothes out of my own house and dropped them in the front yard, she was humming. That is the detail that will not leave me. Not the fury, not the shouting that had preceded it for months, not even the neighbors watching from the sidewalk with that particular expression people wear when they are witnessing something they will describe at dinner for years, the humming. Low and tuneless and satisfied, like a woman doing pleasant housework on a bright Saturday morning, like she was simply rearranging furniture, not dismantling a life. I stood at the end of the driveway and I watched her drop the last armload onto the grass. My gray cashmere sweater landed in the mud beside the rose bushes I had planted the previous next October, the ones I had chosen because my grandmother always said November rose planting was a woman's act of faith in a future she intended to see. Patricia Aldridge straightened up, put both hands on her hips, and looked at me with the expression of a woman who has never once, in 61 years of living, seriously entertained the possibility that she might be wrong about something. Diane is moving in this weekend, she said. Her voice was perfectly even. There's no room for two women in this house. Then she turned around and walked back through my front door, and the screen door banged shut behind her like a period at the end of a sentence she considered closed. What Patricia did not know, what she could not have known, because I had not told a single person, was that 48 hours earlier I had signed a purchase and sale agreement, transferring ownership of that property to Northfield Commercial Development, a demolition and site clearance company headquartered in Hartford, Connecticut. The closing had been quiet. It had been clean. The wire transfer had already cleared my account at 12 minutes past noon on the Thursday before. The house Patricia had just declared hers to manage and reassign was no longer hers to manage or reassign. It was no longer anyone's house in any meaningful sense. In 60 days it would not be a house at all. The structure would be cleared. The lot would be graded. Whatever Northfield built on that land would have nothing in common with the life I had put inside those walls. This is that story. Before I go any further, I want to stop and ask you something directly. Where in the world are you right now? Drop your location and local time in the comments below. It does not matter if it is a Tuesday morning in Auckland or 2 in the afternoon on a rainy Wednesday in Glasgow or a late Friday night in Chicago. I genuinely want to know, and so does everyone else watching. And if you connect with stories about women who built things quietly, who were underestimated and dismissed and treated as movable furniture in rooms they had constructed themselves, please subscribe and give this video a like before we go any further. Stories like this one need an audience, and audiences like you are why this channel exists. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because nothing about that Saturday morning happened in a vacuum, and you deserve to understand the full architecture of what led to it. I grew up in Wethersfield, Connecticut, the eldest daughter of 2 public school teachers who had very clear beliefs about paying your own way and saying what you meant and never waiting for anyone to hand you something you could build yourself. My mother, June Whitmore, managed the household on a whiteboard budget that she updated every Sunday evening after dinner. And her operating philosophy could be condensed into one sentence that she said to me so many times that it is now simply part of how I think. Nobody owes anything, so build it yourself. By the time I was 26, I had a real estate license, a 1-bedroom rental in East Hartford, and enough saved from 4 years of commissions and overtime, and skipped vacations to put a substantial down payment on a property of my own. I was not waiting to be rescued. I was building. Then I met Ryan Aldridge at a closing on a Cape Cod house in Glastonbury. In October of the year I turned 27, he was the seller's agent. I was representing the buyer. He had dark hair and a precise, firm handshake, and he held the door open without making a production of it, which is a small thing but one I have always noticed. We went for coffee after the paperwork was done. He was funny in a quiet and unexpected way, the kind of humor that catches you off guard because it is both intelligent and self-deprecating, and I liked that combination very much. We dated for 14 months. He proposed in the kitchen of a vacant listing I was staging for a seller client, down on one knee on a canvas drop cloth, with a ring he had chosen himself and paid for himself, and I said yes before he finished the sentence he was in the middle of. We were married the following June on a Saturday afternoon in a garden ceremony with 41 guests and a dinner afterward that lasted 4 hours and felt, in the way that only the best evenings, like it could have lasted considerably longer. I need to tell you about Patricia Aldridge, because Patricia is the engine of everything that follows, and you cannot understand the choices I made without understanding the precise nature of what she was. Ryan's mother was 61 years old when I married her son. She had been widowed 9 years earlier when her husband Donald, a mechanical engineer with a quiet manner and a talent for home renovation, died of a sudden cardiac event on a Tuesday morning in February while he was eating breakfast. Donald had left Patricia the family home in Newington, a 4-bedroom colonial on half an acre, with a 2-car garage and energy-efficient windows. He had installed himself the Sumser before he died. Patricia had not held employment since her youngest child was in the 2nd grade. She organized the Wednesday evening potluck at her church. She maintained a garden that she photographed extensively for an audience of approximately 112 Instagram followers. And she spent a considerable and focused portion of each day monitoring the lives of her 2 adult children with the kind of precision and determination that, redirected into almost any professional context, would have made her formidably successful. Ryan was the older of the 2 children. He was 32 when we married, measured and deliberate and genuinely kind in a way that was not performance. His sister Diane was 28. Where Ryan was thoughtful and steady, Diane was loud and impulsive, and had, by the time I entered the picture, already moved through 4 apartments, 2 broken leases, a roommate situation that had ended under circumstances that were never fully explained to me, despite my asking twice, and a series of jobs that ranged in duration from 11 weeks to just under 8 months. Diane did not remain employed for long because, in her accounting of events, every workplace she had ever occupied was run by a narcissist who had failed to recognize her value. She borrowed money with the easy confidence of a person who has never once been told no in any register that she was expected to respect, because she never had been. Patricia funded everything Diane needed, and Ryan, by proximity and by the logic of a family that had always operated this way, was expected to feel a secondary and ongoing responsibility for whatever Patricia could not or did not cover. I understood the architecture of this family within 6 months of dating Ryan. I am a real estate agent. I assess foundations for a living. I look at load-bearing walls and I distinguish them from the decorative ones. What I found when I looked at the Aldridge family structure was this. Patricia had organized her entire sense of safety and purpose around being needed. She needed Ryan to need her guidance and validation. She needed Diane to need her money and her management. She needed to occupy the position of most essential woman in every room her children inhabited, and when I walked in, I became the variable that disrupted that geometry. Not because I was hostile, not because I was difficult, simply because I existed and Ryan loved me, and love, in Patricia's interior accounting, was a finite resource that my presence was drawing away from her. The first incident happened 9 months before our wedding. We were at Patricia's house for Sunday dinner, Ryan and I and Diane, and a cousin named Garrett, who appeared at family gatherings with the unpredictability of weather. I had brought a dessert, an apple and walnut tart I had made from scratch, using my grandmother's recipe, the same one she had made for every family gathering for 30 years. I set it on the counter. Patricia looked at it for exactly 2 seconds and said, in a pleasant and informational tone, "Ryan doesn't like walnuts." She said it the way you would tell someone they had their headlights on in a parking garage. Helpful, factual, implicitly correcting. Ryan looked at me across the table, opened his mouth, and then looked at his mother, and then said nothing. He ate 2 slices that evening and told me afterward in the car that they were delicious. and I appreciated that, but it was the silence at the table that I was cataloging, not the compliment in the car. The second incident happened 3 months before the wedding, on a Tuesday evening at 9:47 at night. I remember the time because I was reviewing comparable market analyses for a listing that needed to go live the following morning, and I had my laptop open on my kitchen table and 2 windows up on the screen when my phone rang. Patricia. She told me she had been speaking with her pastor about the ceremony and that he had expressed the view that traditional vows were meaningful for a reason, specifically the part in which the wife promises to obey her husband. She said this gently, in the tone of a woman passing along a helpful suggestion from a trusted mutual friend. I told her the ceremony had been finalized and that Ryan and I had written our vows together and were satisfied with them. She said, "Well, I just think some things are traditional for a reason, Claire." Then she said goodnight and ended the call. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I went back to the comps because the listing could not wait, and because I had already decided not to let Patricia's opinions live rent-free in my head when there was actual work to be done. The third incident, the one that showed me everything I needed to know about the nature of what I was dealing with, happened 18 days before the wedding. Ryan and I had an offer accepted on a house, 1940s colonial on Birchwood Lane in Wethersfield, 2.5 blocks from the street where I had grown up, close enough that I could walk to my mother's house in 12 minutes if I felt like it. 3 bedrooms, a detached garage with an interior workbench I immediately began planning uses for, an eat-in kitchen with original hardwood floors that needed refinishing but had good bones, and a south-facing backyard that got afternoon light all the way through October. The price was $287,000. My down payment was $62,000, which I had earned commission by commission and saved without a single contribution from anyone. Ryan contributed $21,000. Together we were buying something real. Something that was going to be ours in the way that only a home you have worked to afford can be yours. Patricia found out about the accepted offer through Ryan that evening. She arrived at Ryan's apartment, which I was in the process of moving my things into, without calling first. She had a printed copy of the property listing and a handwritten list of concerns she had composed on a notepad from her church. There were 12 items on the list. They included the age of the roof, the school bus route on the adjacent street, the fact that the backyard did not receive morning sun, and a belief which she held with complete conviction that Birchwood Lane had historically had a drainage and flooding problem. I asked her which specific years she had observed flooding on Birchwood Lane. She said she had read about it somewhere. I asked where. She could not remember. Ryan walked her through each item with a patience I did not feel and did not perform. Patricia nodded through each response and then looked at me and said, "I just want to make sure Ryan knows what he's getting into." Not what they were both getting into. What Ryan was getting into. As if I were the property under review, not the house on Birchwood Lane. As if my job for the previous 6 years, the 90-plus transactions I had closed, the hundreds of inspection reports and disclosure packets and title insurance documents I had read, were not relevant context for evaluating a residential purchase. I looked at her evenly. I said, "Patricia, I have been a licensed real estate agent for 6 years. I have closed over 90 transactions. I have read every inspection report and every disclosure document for this property in detail. I know exactly what we are getting into." She smiled at me. It was the particular smile of a woman who has already decided the conversation, but is too polished to say so directly. "Well, you know best," she said, which was her way of communicating that she believed no such thing. We bought the house. We closed on a Thursday in late March. Ryan's name was on the mortgage because at the time his credit score was 17 points above mine, and the difference in interest rate over a 30-year term was significant enough to matter. My name was on the deed. $62,000 of the down payment was mine. The house was mine in every sense that was real, and in one sense that was technically and legally formal, and that technicality was going to matter in the end, though not in the direction Patricia was expecting. The first year of marriage was genuinely good. Ryan and I worked hard and came home tired and ate dinner together. At a table I had chosen from a second-hand shop and refinished in a pale sage green that looked right in the kitchen light. I refinished the hardwood floors over a long August weekend while Ryan was at a real estate conference in Boston. I did it myself, rented the floor sander, moved every piece of furniture, applied 3 coats over 2 days, and when Ryan came home Sunday evening and walked in and saw the floors gleaming in the evening light, his face did the thing faces do when a space becomes something it was not before. I painted the trim in the upstairs hallway a deep navy that looked expensive in a way that costs nothing except the willingness to commit to a color. I planted roses along the south fence in October, 6 plants in 3 varieties, because November was coming and the ground would harden soon, and I wanted something to be waiting there in spring. Ryan grilled on the back deck on Sunday afternoons, and we drank cold beer and watched the light change over the yard, and I thought regularly, with a quiet satisfaction that I did not have to announce to anyone. I built this, not alone, but mostly. Patricia came every 3rd Sunday. She always arrived with food nobody had asked for and observations nobody had requested. She rearranged items on my kitchen shelves twice that I witnessed, and an uncertain number of additional times that I did not. She commented on the navy paint in the hallway, which she found dark and not to her taste. She asked Ryan on at least 2 occasions, which Ryan relayed with what he believed was affectionate amusement, but which I heard differently, whether he felt the financial arrangement of the house was equitable given the disparity in their respective contributions to the down payment. Ryan told her it was equitable and that I had more than earned my share, and I appreciated that, but I noted that he said it in the car on the way home, not at her kitchen table in the moment she raised it. Then came the 2nd year and Diane's situation and the conversations that would not stop. Diane had been living in a 1st-floor apartment in New Britain, sharing it with a man named Travis who owned 2 large dogs and had, in the time I knew of him, never appeared to hold a job or feel the absence of one acutely. By February, Travis was gone. The apartment lease had 6 weeks until expiration. Diane had been terminated from a receptionist position at an HVAC company she had held for 7 months, her longest tenure anywhere since I had known her. Patricia paid Diane's last month of rent. Patricia paid the early termination fee on the lease, which was $1,200, and Patricia began calling Ryan to discuss her concern about Diane having nowhere stable and appropriate to land. The first conversation happened on the evening of March 11th. I know this because I wrote the date and time in the notes application on my phone the same night it occurred. At 9:22, after Ryan came into the kitchen where I was doing quarterly invoicing for a commercial client and said, with the tentative phrasing of a man who already knows the answer but has been asked to ask the question anyway, Mom was wondering if Diane could use our 3rd bedroom for a few months while she gets back on her feet. I set my laptop down. I looked at him. I said, no. He said that was probably what I would say. I said, good. He said he would tell her. He told her. Patricia received this information and processed it for approximately 3 weeks. Then she called Ryan again. Then she called a 3rd time, then a 4th. Each call was a variation on the same score, played in a slightly different key. Diane was struggling. The family needed to rally. It would be temporary. Claire had that whole room just sitting empty, and it seemed like, well, it just seemed like a woman who truly prioritized family might be willing to extend herself a little further for someone who needed her. I was not asked again directly. Patricia never brought the request back to me. What she did was work on Ryan with the patience and persistence and oblique consistency of someone who has been getting what she wants from him for 32 years and has no reason to change her method. She did not argue. She reminded. She returned. She planted things in quiet sentences that grew in the soil of Ryan's lifelong training, that peace in this family meant yielding to his mother's preferences, and Ryan, who was a fundamentally kind man, but a man who had never once been given the tools to hold a line against the woman who had shaped him, began to waver in ways that were small at first and then less small. I watched it happen. I did not make scenes about it. I told Ryan clearly twice more over the following weeks that my answer had not changed and would not change, and that if he needed to hear why, I was willing to explain the reasoning at length, but that the reasoning should not need to be explained more than once to a partner who had already heard it. He said he understood. He said he would handle it. I believed him with diminishing conviction as February became March, and March moved toward April, and the calls from Patricia did not stop. I want to tell you about the 6 weeks before the Saturday that changed everything, because that is where the real story lives. That is what Patricia never saw. That is the engine that was running quietly in the background while she was planning a moving schedule and measuring Diane's furniture and deciding which of my closet contents were expendable. In early March, while the Diane conversations were still quietly escalating and Ryan was still telling me he would handle it, and Patricia was still calling, I made an appointment. Not with Ryan. Not with a therapist. I made an appointment on a Tuesday morning with a man named Marcus Reedy, a real estate attorney whose office was on Pearl Street in Hartford, whose reputation in the industry I had known for 4 years, and who I had referred 3 clients to in the previous 18 months. I sat across from him in his conference room with a view of the parking structure below, and I described the situation with the same precision I would use to brief a client on a property with title complications. Marcus listened. He asked specific questions. He pulled up the deed and the mortgage documentation on his screen and read them carefully. Then he explained to me, clearly and without drama, exactly what my rights as a co-owner of the property were and what options were legally available to me. What Marcus confirmed was this. My name appeared on the deed as a co-owner of the Birchwood Lane property. The deed had been written in a specific form, tenancies common, rather than joint tenancy with right of survivorship, a detail our original real estate attorney had drafted without specifically discussing its implications with us, because we had been 2 people in love buying a house and not anticipating the circumstances that make those distinctions matter. As a tenant in common, I held an undivided ownership interest in the property. That interest was mine to convey, sell, or transfer, subject to certain notice requirements and accounting for the outstanding mortgage. Ryan's name on the mortgage did not restrict my ability to sell my interest, provided the sale involved proper handling of the mortgage payoff. Marcus also told me something else that I had been watching develop but had not yet formally researched. The Birchwood Lane corridor had been shifting. 3 residential properties within a half-mile radius had been acquired by commercial developers in the previous 14 months. A medical office complex was under construction at the north end of the street. 2 adjacent lots had been rezoned from residential to mixed commercial use. The land underneath residential properties on that block was worth more to a commercial buyer than the structures themselves were worth to a residential one. I was sitting on an asset whose highest and best use, in current market conditions, was not what it currently was. I made a second appointment 2 weeks later, this time with representatives from 2 commercial development firms who had been actively acquiring along the corridor. I met them separately, on different days, in neutral locations. I asked about timelines, about process, about what a clean site acquisition would require, and what they were prepared to offer for a property with direct road access and the specific lot dimensions of the Birchwood Lane house. I listened. I asked follow-up questions. I took notes in the small notebook I carry in my bag to every client meeting. I did not make any commitments. I was gathering information, building a complete picture, the way I do before any significant transaction, because incomplete information is how people make decisions they later regret. The 3rd appointment was on Thursday, April 24th, at 2:15 in the afternoon, in Marcus's conference room on Pearl Street. Representative from Northfield Commercial Development sat across the table with their acquisition team. Their interest in the Birchwood Lane corridor was not new. They had already closed on 2 comparable lots within 600 feet of my property. They had a project timeline that made my specific parcel valuable within a defined window. Their offer was $341,000 for the land and structure, as with a 60-day closing timeline and a site clearance scheduled to begin within 90 days of transfer. My mortgage payoff balance at that time was $189,400. After closing costs, Marcus's fees and the mortgage satisfaction, the net proceeds to me were $138,214. That was my equity. I had built it commission by commission and monthly payment by monthly payment, and every hour of overtime and every Saturday showing and every floor I had refinished with my own hands. It was mine. I signed the purchase and sale agreement on April 24th at 3:41 in the afternoon. The closing was set for June 26th. The wire confirming the initial deposit cleared my escrow account at 12 minutes past noon on the Friday. The property had been sold. The structure that Patricia was planning to repurpose would not exist in 90 days. Now here is the thing that required the most discipline, the thing that I think people find most difficult to believe when I tell them this story. I told no one. Not my mother, not Kathy, my neighbor who had lived on Birchwood Lane for 30 years and missed nothing, not a colleague, not a friend, not anyone in the world who knew both me and Ryan. Not because I was being cruel. Not because I was playing a game. Because what I was doing was legal, deliberate, and necessary. And the moment I said it out loud, it would become a conflict to be managed rather than a decision I had already made. I had spent 2 years being asked to justify my no's to a woman who had already decided she was entitled to my yes. I was done justifying. I was acting. Ryan told Patricia on a Thursday evening that he had something to attend to that Saturday morning and that she should plan to come the following weekend instead. Patricia, I learned afterward through a sequence of events I will describe shortly, decided not to wait for the following weekend. She called Diane. She rented a truck. She arrived at Birchwood Lane on the Saturday morning with a plan she had not discussed with her son, a plan that required no negotiation because in her model of reality, my position in that house was one of those things that could be managed around rather than consulted. I was at a showing on the other side of town, a 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood I had been working for 6 months, when my cell phone rang at 11:43 in the morning. Kathy Brennan, who is 68 years old and has lived on Birchwood Lane since before Ryan was born and does not, under any circumstances, miss a thing. "Claire," she said, "there is a woman taking your things out of your house." I was standing in a stranger's kitchen, next to a refrigerator with a child's drawings held on with magnets, and I felt something go very still inside me. Not panic, the opposite of panic. A crystalline, cold clarity. "What kind of things?" I asked. "Clothes," Kathy said. "She is piling them in the front yard. There is a moving truck at the curb." I drove back to Birchwood Lane in 17 minutes. The pile on the front lawn included my gray cashmere sweater, 2 blazers I wore to client presentations, 4 pairs of shoes, including the black heels I had owned for 6 years, a stack of folded work blouses, a canvas tote containing my gym clothes and a novel I was halfway through, and a framed photograph of my parents on their wedding day that had been sitting on the dresser in our bedroom since the week we moved in. Patricia was emerging from the front door with what appeared to be the last armload as I pulled into the driveway. Diane was standing on the porch with her arms folded, watching the proceedings with the expression of someone observing a chore being completed on her behalf. A rented moving truck with a green logo sat at the curb. Inside the open back, I could see boxes, a rolled rug, a wooden headboard leaned against the wall. I parked the car. I got out. I walked to the end of the driveway, and I stood there. I watched Patricia carry the armload across the grass and drop it beside the roses. My cashmere sweater landed in the mud. She straightened up, put both hands on her hips, looked at me, and said, Diane is moving in this weekend. There's no room for 2 women in this house. Then she walked back through my front door, and the screen door banged shut, and I stood in the morning air, and I felt with a clarity I have not experienced before or since, that something I had been waiting for had finally arrived. Not the humiliation of the clothes on the lawn, something older. The arrival of the moment in which I no longer had to wonder whether things would eventually improve. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I bent down and picked up my cashmere sweater and folded it over my arm. Then I took out my phone, and I called the number I had saved in my contacts under the name Marcus Reedy, real estate attorney. He picked up on the second ring. I said 4 words. "It is time. Proceed." Marcus knew what those 4 words meant. He had been expecting them, or something like them, since April 24th. He told me the formal notice to Ryan would go out within 48 hours, as required, through a certified letter to his attorney of record. Ryan would be informed in his capacity as the mortgage holder that the property had been sold under my ownership rights as a tenant in common, that the mortgage payoff was in process as part of the closing, and that the property would transfer to Northfield Commercial Development on June 26th. There was nothing to stop the sale. The deed transfer documentation had been filed. The deposit had cleared. The buyer had begun preliminary site assessments. Patricia and Diane would need to vacate the premises well in advance of the closing date. I went inside the house. Patricia was in the kitchen, opening cabinet doors and examining the contents with the focused attention of someone taking inventory of a space they intend to reorganize. Diane was in the 3rd bedroom, standing in the center of the empty floor with a cloth measuring tape, calling out numbers to herself. Ryan was at the kitchen table, sitting with his hands folded in front of him, and the expression of a man who knows he has done something he cannot undo and is hoping very hard that the consequences will be soft and brief. I looked at all 3 of them. Then I pulled out the chair across from Ryan and I sat down. "I need everyone to come to this table," I said. "I have something to explain. If you are still watching right now, I want to pause here and speak to you directly for a moment. If you have ever been the person in your family, or in your marriage, or in any room where decisions were made about your life, who was expected to accommodate and adjust and move aside without being asked, who gave and was treated as though the giving was simply part of your function rather than a choice you were making, I want you to drop a comment right now and tell me your story. Tell me 1 sentence. Tell me a whole paragraph. Tell me whatever feels true. And if this story is landing somewhere real in your chest, please subscribe before we go any further, because what happens next in that kitchen is the part I have been waiting to tell you. We sat, all 4 of us. Patricia had come in from the kitchen with a bewildered expression that was already composing itself back into control. Diane had come in from the 3rd bedroom, still holding the measuring tape. Ryan had not moved from his chair. I placed a document on the table, 2 pages. The executed purchase and sale agreement with the Northfield Commercial Development letterhead across the top, and the signature lines at the bottom, the date in the upper right corner. April 24th, 2 days prior. "This house sold on Thursday," I said. I used the same voice I use when I walk a first-time buyer through a disclosure document that contains something they did not expect. Even, clear, informational. The buyer is a commercial development company. The closing date is June 26th. The mortgage will be satisfied from the sale proceeds. The net proceeds beyond the mortgage payoff represent my equity and will be distributed to me. You will all receive formal legal notification through your respective attorneys within 48 hours. I looked at Patricia directly. You will need to remove Diane's belongings from the moving truck today. There is no room arrangement to negotiate because there is no longer a house in which to negotiate it. Patricia stared at the document on the table. Her mouth opened once and then closed. The color in her face, which had been the healthy pink of a woman who had just spent an hour doing useful and satisfying physical activity, went through 2 rapid changes. Diane looked from her mother to the pages and then to Ryan. Ryan looked at the table. He had not moved or spoken. "What does this mean?" Diane asked. Her voice had a quality it did not usually carry. Smallness. "It means the structure will be demolished," I said. "Northfields is a site clearance company. This is a commercial development acquisition. The house will not exist after September." Patricia found her voice. It arrived in a register I had not heard from her before, stripped down past the pleasantness to something rawer underneath. "You cannot sell this house without Ryan's agreement. His name is on the mortgage." "Ryan's name is on the mortgage," I said. "My name is on the deed. The deed is the instrument of ownership. The sale has been executed under my ownership rights. The contract is signed and filed. The buyer has begun preliminary assessments. There is no mechanism by which this sale can be reversed." "You went behind his back." Her voice shook slightly on the last word. "I exercised my legal right as a co-owner of the property. This is vindictive. This is you destroying this family because you are too selfish to share a house." I looked at her without expression. "Patricia, you drove to my home this morning with a moving truck. You removed my belongings from inside my house and placed them on the lawn without my knowledge and without my consent. You did not ask Ryan. You did not ask me. You simply decided that the configuration of this house was yours to determine. I made a legal decision about a property I co-own. Both of us were acting on what we believed we had the right to control. The difference is that I was correct." That was the only extended statement I made in that room. Everything that came after was paperwork and process. Ryan tried to reach me by phone 4 times that afternoon. I let the calls go to voicemail. I texted him one sentence. "Marcus Reedy is managing the legal process from this point. He will be in contact with your attorney." In the evening, Ryan came to the house, which he had every right to be in for 59 more days, and we sat at the kitchen table, and he talked for a long time. He said he had not known Patricia was coming that morning with a truck. He said he had told her they needed to wait. He said things had gone further than he had intended or wanted. He said he was sorry. He said he loved me. I listened to all of it. I believed the part about not knowing about the truck that morning. I believed the regret was genuine. What I said to him, quietly and without any rise in my voice, was this: "Ryan, your regret about this morning does not change the shape of the last 2 years. Every time I asked you to hold a line, you heard me, and then you chose her comfort over my clarity. That is not one mistake. That is the architecture of how you have operated in this marriage from the beginning, and I have been trying to live inside that architecture for long enough to know that it does not fit me." He sat with that for a while. He poured us both water. The kitchen was very quiet in the way that kitchens are quiet, when something that has been building for a long time finally stops building and simply becomes what it is. He asked if there was anything he could do. I told him I did not know yet. That was the honest answer. I did not offer more than the honest answer. Patricia called me on Tuesday morning at 8:14. I know the time, because I noted it. Her voice was different than I had heard it before. Stripped of the pleasant register she usually maintained, raw in the way that voices are raw when the person using them has been awake since before dawn going over something. She said she had always tried to welcome me into the family. She said she only ever wanted what was best for her children. She said she felt I had overreacted and that the sale of the house was an extreme and destructive response to a misunderstanding. I let her finish. I said, "Patricia, I did not sell the house in response to Saturday morning. I sold the house 6 weeks before Saturday morning because it was the correct financial decision given the commercial development trajectory of the corridor, and because I had been building toward that decision since March. What happened on Saturday morning did not cause my decision. It confirmed what I had already known for some time about the nature of this situation and my position in it." She was quiet for a long moment. "I just wanted Diane to have somewhere safe," she said finally. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. "I understand that," I said, "but it was not your house to offer her. It was never your house. It was mine, and now it belongs to someone else." We said our goodbyes with the formal politeness of two people who have arrived at the end of something and know there is nothing further to negotiate. I have not spoken to her since that call. The closing happened on June 26th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Marcus's conference room. I sat in the chair I had sat in on April 24th, and I signed 17 pages of documentation, and I walked out 45 minutes later into a June afternoon with a cashier's check and the feeling of a woman who has finished something she started herself. Not triumph, not bitterness, something quieter and more permanent than either of those. The particular satisfaction of completion. The house on Birchwood Lane was cleared on September 9th. I drove past the week before demolition was scheduled to begin. I parked on the opposite side of the street and looked at it for perhaps 4 minutes through the windshield. The roses along the south fence were blooming, rust orange and pale yellow in the early September light, exactly as I had imagined them when I planted them in the cold October ground 3 years earlier. I looked at them for the 4 minutes, and then I drove away without stopping, because stopping would have been for sentiment's sake, and the time for sentiment had passed, and what remained was simply the work of building what came next. Ryan and I attempted to find a way forward. I want to say that plainly because I think the version of this story where I walked away without trying is both easier and less accurate than the truth. We saw a marriage counselor for 3 months beginning in July. We had long conversations that went to real and honest places. Ryan did eventually, fully and without qualification, understand the weight of what had accumulated and what his role in it had been. He was not a bad person. He was a person who had learned, over 32 years of being shaped by a mother who did not accept the word no as a complete thought, that peace in his family meant yielding, and he had never been asked to examine the cost of that pattern to the people who loved him. But understanding a pattern and having genuinely changed are two different things, and by November I understood the difference clearly enough to make the decision I made. We filed for divorce in January. It was not ugly. It was sad in the way that real endings are sad, which is to say, it was heavy and quiet and entirely lacking in the drama that would have made it easier to narrate at a distance. We divided what was ours to divide. The equity from the Birchwood Lane sale was mine and remained mine because Marcus had built that clarity into the process from the beginning. We shook hands at the end of the final meeting, and Ryan looked at me and said, "I should have held the line. I know that now." I said, "I know you do. I hope you hold it next time." He nodded. We walked out different doors. That was the right ending. Diane is living with Patricia. She moved in the week after the June 26th closing. Once it became clear there was no Birchwood Lane option available. Patricia sold a portion of the investment account her late husband had left her to cover Diane's most recent shortfall. The boutique Diane had been planning to open has not opened. Patricia's garden still has 112 Instagram followers. I do not follow accounts that cause me nothing but fatigue. I want to say something to you, directly, before we close. I know that some of you watching this are in a version of what I was in. Maybe it is a mother-in-law. Maybe it is a parent. Maybe it is a sibling or a spouse or someone who has decided, without asking you, that your contributions are simply part of the landscape, that your name on the document is a formality rather than a fact, that your life is available for rearrangement whenever their needs require it. I want you to hear something I wish someone had said to me clearly, several years before I needed to act on it. Your name on the deed is not a courtesy. It is not a formality. It is a legal reality, and legal realities do not require anyone else's acknowledgement to be true. The same is true of every other form of ownership you have built. Your work is real. Your equity is real. Your labor and your precision as the floors you refinished with your own hands, and the roses you planted in November because you intended to be there, in spring, all of it is real, and all of it belongs to you. And no one can redistribute it without your agreement just by deciding loudly enough that they are entitled to do so. The women who get quietly erased are not lesser women. They are women who were taught, by love or by habit or by the exhausting labor of keeping peace in rooms that should have been safer, to wait for permission before trusting what they can see with their own eyes. I stopped waiting. I read my own documents. I made my own appointments. I sat across from my own attorney and asked my own questions and made my own decisions and did not announce them until they were done, because the time for announcing things to people who had already decided not to listen was over. That is not revenge. It is literacy. The literacy of a woman who finally read the fine print on her own life and acted accordingly. My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 34 years old. I planted roses in November because I believed in a future I intended to see. I sold the house in April because I could see clearly by then that the future I had believed in was not the one I was living in, and because I understood that I had both the right and the means to choose a different one. I am not angry. I am not bitter. I am the woman standing in the September light looking at Rust Rose one last time before driving away, because some things deserve one long, clear look before you leave them behind, and I am also the woman who left. If there is someone in your life who is treating your contributions as available for redistribution, your space as theirs to assign, your silence as consent to whatever arrangement they have decided serves them, I want you to know one thing. The fine print is always there. Read it. Understand it. And when the time comes, act on it quietly, completely, and without apology, because you were always allowed to. Tell me in the comments, has anyone in your family or your marriage ever treated something that was yours as though it was theirs to give away? What did you do? What do you wish you had done differently? I read every comment, every single one. I will see you in the next video. And before you leave, I want to take 30 seconds to say something I genuinely mean. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sitting with a story that does not have a clean villain or a standing ovation at the end, just a woman who read her own documents and made a call and walked out a different door. This channel exists because we believe that the women who were asked to be quiet, to move over, to accommodate and adjust and absorb, deserve to have their stories told with the same precision and gravity that they brought to every room they were underestimated in. We are going to keep telling them, one story at a time, for as long as you keep showing up to hear them. Every single day we put up a new episode. Subscribe so you never miss the moment when the quiet one finally speaks, and not with words, with documents. I will see you tomorrow.